So this is a variation on a talk that I gave at DerbyCon last year. Has anybody seen that talk? Okay, good. Then you haven't seen the jokes yet. Oh. Okay. So this is not a talk that's going to take the entire amount of time. So it'll go a little bit quick, and then we can just kind of talk during Q&A and bounce between slides if you really care about that kind of stuff. First, a little bit about Era. Starting in September, the company is basically becoming mine. The parent company basically sheltered me for 2 years while I built up my security consulting practice. Has decided to really focus on the core, which is the software they write. So we're splitting off. It's completely amicable. And but the new name is going to be Era. It's going to be my company, and it's going to be a company based on security and iterative improvement. If you've seen any of my other talks, you know, it's not really a surprise. Same thing I've been doing for the last several years. But it's just now, it's me that's calling the shots, and that's a different kind of change. So, for those that haven't met me, let me introduce myself. This is me.
My son has your comic book.
As you can see, I've been doing this for a while. He's not joking, I did make a comic book. I'm in the process of making another comic book. So we can talk more about that later once we get through the talk. And this is what I do. And I really need to update this slide because I do a whole lot more now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about vendor assessment. If my slides advance. Okay. Suppose you want to deploy a new technology, right? Unless you choose open source where you're evaluating on a project basis, you have to evaluate vendors. So you have to be able to assess them. Now, there are a bunch of ways to do this. You can use somebody else's assessment, which means you'll be stuck with their beliefs, and they may not meet your needs. If you end up gathering so much data so you make the perfect right decision, it can take way too long. I've seen businesses take 3 years to make a decision when they finally say, okay, I want to buy. The company says, well, we're sorry, the product you evaluated just took out of life.
I wanted to get XP.
Then kill some orcs. All right, I haven't been able to make that joke in years. Okay. So if in a security space, if you take too long to assess a vendor, you're basically lengthening your attack window. You know, if you're looking at a security solution, that's a longer amount of time you're not being protected. If you gather too little, you run the risk of making the wrong decision. So many years ago, when I was serving as an outsourced CISO for a bank, they needed somebody to do the due diligence work while they were assessing vendors, but they had to bring things in right away because the auditors were saying, you need to have this in before the next audit cycle. So I slowly developed this process to quickly assess vendors. And what happened is I turned that process into a line of work that I was doing. I turned that line of work into this presentation, which you're going to see a variant thereof. And then at DerbyCon last year, the publisher Singers saw my talk and says, hey, you really should write a book. So the first book I fully wrote on my own is about this process. So we're kind of going to bounce back and forth between different variants of the process, and I can talk about evolution if you want, or I can just go straight through the basic and talk. So I wrote this book, okay? The core idea behind the process is rapid analytics, and I'm going to zoom in on this, you don't have to worry if you can't read it. So rapid analytics, aiming for good enough, not best. You can determine a solution that's good enough in 1/10 of the time it takes you to find something that's the best. And that time that you spend implementing and using the solution that's good enough is time that gives you learning value. If you end up deciding, okay, the solution we picked is wrong, I'm going to throw it out, you haven't made the wrong decision. You've bought yourself a class. And during that class, you've used the thing, you figured out, okay, it sort of works, doesn't quite work the way I want. And then when you go through the process again, you can make a much better decision. So this is iterative improvement in a vendor selection space. and it winds up being much faster, much cheaper. So, the basic process is like this. Start with research. I like to use the web. We have it, might as well use it. Build a list of all possible vendors, then build a list of all possible features that those vendors have. So list of all vendors, spreadsheet, list of all features in a spreadsheet, and then start filling it in. All of these vendors, do they have these features? Score the features based on, are they good features, are they bad features, how does that matter? And then get deep into the details of the book itself. But basically, once you start here, you've got two options. One is very, very fast. Use an internet-based feature comparison, looking just at what features the vendors claim to have. Use that to massively narrow the field. And what you generally wind up with is several vendors you recognize and a handful of vendors you've never heard of before. And that's where new blood comes in. If you're talking about an evolutionary approach, evolution works because you need change. And you can't evolve a system if you don't have mutation. So you need a source of mutation, and in the course of vendor assessments, that's what new vendors are. They may not be the right choice for you, but the ideas they bring in are going to disrupt the market. And at some point, when enough of those ideas have penetrated the market to a point where a lot of people are starting to use this vendor, and things are starting to make sense, then that's when you see this big paradigm shift. Yes?
When you talk about features, you're talking about the software they use, or the processes they use, or
If
market
you-
speak?
I'm talking market speak. At this phase,
Okay.
I'm talking market speak.
Thank you.
Okay, so for option one, very fast, look at the market speak. Never trust that the vendors do what they say they're doing, but trust that all vendors are lying equally, so you can compare them on an even scale. Okay. The option two is less fast, and it involves doing a series of small tests on each vendor and weeding through in that way. So option one tends to work better with IT because there's massive costs of running proof of concept exercises in IT. IT's complex and it can take a while. Option two tends to work best when the technology is quite simple to use. So the example I'm going to run through is going to be option two, just so you kind of get a feel for what the deep nitty-gritty way to do it looks like. Option one is very similar, it's just a little bit faster. Okay? So once you have that, if you're using complex technology, you need to select your variables and start scoring. Okay? Now, these variables I'm using are security variables. And something that's stressed greatly in the book, and I need to stress here is, these are my variables. Don't use my variables. Pick your own variables. I use my variables because they work for me. I'm generally assess security technology. This is the Parkerian hexad, if you've ever worked with that system. And the reason it works for me is when I try to use systems of 3 variables, I get confused because there are things that aren't captured. And I lose thinking time in trying to figure out, okay, how do I capture this concern? Is it confidence? Is it availability? Is it integrity? Where does it fit? I've tried to use really complex systems like the CISSP list of 10 domains. And that's really too complex because you have things that's like, well, I'm doing this assessment, but nothing I do hits the physical variable because it's completely virtual. So for me, 6 variables works really well.
You said you give a modifier, some kind of hexad?
Parkerian.
Parkerian, after
Yeah.
Parker.
After Parker. Yeah, so if you just Google that, it'll pop up and you'll see the details. A paper he wrote like 4 to 6 years ago. I forget how long ago it was now. But he basically, it was a paper talking about, CIA isn't good enough. This is what's better. So it's CIA plus. So the basic idea is you figure out these are the variables that matter to me, that matter for this project. And the first one's going to be uncomfortable because you're basically starting from scratch. The next one's going to be uncomfortable because you have to start from scratch again. But it's like making biscuits. You start from scratch every time, but you get better at it and it goes faster, even though you're starting from scratch each time.
And it gets to a point where basically the entire process becomes just simply one blip.
Yeah. Yeah, you can generally do a lot of this starting from scratch stuff in a kickoff meeting. You know, get the team together, 4 hours, figure it out, move forward.
Agreed. And the fifth or 10th time you do it, it's a lot easier.
Yes. Yeah. Now, the first time you do it, it's a lot harder than the way you've been doing it, because that's how change works.
It used to be.
Yeah. Okay, so once you've assessed things, you do scoring and weighting, and then that feeds back into the funnel.
Is
Now,
that a filter, screen?
it's a magnifying glass.
Magnifying glass, okay.
Yeah.
Examination.
Yeah. At this point, how you filter matters. One way is to say, all right, I'm going to take 80% of what I don't care about and throw it out the door. So you take that massive list of vendors you have and just look at the 20% that you think stand a chance. That's the fast way to do it. Now, if you're in a bigger business where you really have to, show massive amounts of analytics, then you throw out the crappy 20% and keep the remaining 80 to dig deeper in. So it's really a political choice around speed as to how you do that. Now, when you get to deep testing, this is where things get a little bit deeper, obviously, right? So this is where you do more thorough tests. So this is where you connect to virtual instances that the vendors give you to connect and start playing with the interface, or you connect out to a test appliance they bring in. If you do it like in security, what I like to do a lot of is take a vendor's device and put it behind your existing vendor's device and see if it catches things that your existing vendor should catch and doesn't. So that's one way to do it. If you're doing outbound, you can just put something in place, start sending live traffic through it, fork traffic, see how it behaves in a live environment. Because we're going to wind up with, in each one of those variables I mentioned, is a list of questions. And the book goes through the process of developing the Likert items and how all of that works. And I'm not going to bore you with the details of psychometrics here. But basically, you want to fairly score your vendors along a multiple set of variables and then weight those variables accordingly. And that's where the adjusting need piece comes in. So, like in my example, you've got integrity, you've got authority, you've got confidence, in the data, stuff like that. And some of those might matter more than others. For me, I tend to rate utility very high because I've seen a lot of people put in some absolutely excellent security technology and then not use it at all because their people can't figure out how to use it. So I tend to put a 2 or 3 modifier on utility, so it's twice or 3 times as important as the other variables. Yes?
Utility, you mean like usability?
It's like usability. Usability is a subset of utility. Okay? So utility would be, like in a firewall, right? Utility would be, can the admin use the firewall? Can the users, if they're blocked by a web filter module on the firewall, know what they were doing was wrong, why it was wrong, and how to address it? That's a usability piece. Does it actually block attacks? Also falls under utility. And that's not really a usability thing because that's anti-usability from an attacker's perspective. So utility is a little more encompassing. Okay. Now, when you're adjusting the needs, which basically is applying weighting metrics on those, you have to be careful because that is the big flaw in the process. If a team misweights a variable because of political manipulations or something like that, the wrong vendor can win. So the team has to understand, hey, this is the weakness in the system. The advantage is it's really, really fast compared to traditional ways of assessing vendors. The weakness is you can manipulate it right here. And I point out, this is where you do it because you can then look for it. So an example of manipulation is if somebody says, well, I want to weight this one at 1.792. And hey, look, my favorite vendor won. How interesting. That's a red flag for that sort of mathematic manipulation that's going on. It's basically gerrymandering the system, right?
Question.
Yes.
on that last slide. Just out of curiosity, down at the bottom hopper where the winners are going,
Yes.
there's another key going from the left.
Yes. Yes, that is, if I jump all the way back to this diagram, that comes in from the negotiating prices.
Okay.
That's what Okay, so where was I was here. Okay, so basically then it goes back in and you resort based on the new findings, and then you go into price negotiation. And I'm not going to get deep in the details of price negotiation here. If you want to know more, talk to me afterwards or buy the book. Buy the book, right? The basic idea here is, by the time you get through this process, you're going to have between 2 and 4 vendors that come through the bottom filter, the very last filter. Any one of them will be good enough. So you pick the one you want, and you go to the vendor and say, hey, I want this, but I want it at the price of number 2. And if the vendor says yes or no, or you start negotiating and work that through. If you can't negotiate with the vendor, go to number 2, play the same game. And it basically puts the negotiation power in your hands instead of theirs. Because as I point out in the books, vendors sell a whole lot more often than you buy. They're a lot better at it than you are. So here's the process again. Now, let's look at an example. Suppose you want to find the absolute best security vendor. Pen testing. I spent a year collecting pens from the security conference I went to. And I then went and applied my vendor assessment process on the pens the vendors handed out. You are about to sit through a 40-minute long pun.
Oh my God, I love it.
So, no, the pen part isn't the book. Though I will say, at DerbyCon when I did this, the audience gasped and half of them left. Okay. The hard thing about assessing vendors is knowing what you're going to need in the future. You know, as they say in the financial space, past performance is no guarantee of future results.
Agreed.
But you can take a guess. And with pens, you can take 2 guesses. You know, you have to be able to write, and you have to be able to trust what's been written. So,
Does that include, is it erasable?
actually, none of these pens were erasable.
Are these like security pens that you can use for sign checks, that kind of thing?
We'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so these were my anticipatory metrics for doing the pen testing, right? We map what's easily measurable for this first round. Then it's a matter of cycling through and doing short, very rapid tests of everything. So in the interest of time, we're just going to assume all of those pens we saw are viable and have made it past the first filter and go straight to functional testing on a variable by variable basis, okay? So we've got some basic stuff there. So then we analyze. So this is what I did, is I printed all of the vendor logos, and I printed blank sheets, and I traced the vendor logo on each sheet for each pen. And I analyzed based on confidentiality, extra control, integrity, authenticity, availability, and utility. Okay? Why? I mentioned this a little bit, but basically, the goal is to guide thinking, not restrict it. Confidence, integrity, and availability is too restrictive. The CISSP domains are too large. It takes too much time on both sides of that scale to figure out, where does what I care about fit into the model? Which is why you need to build a new model each time you do this. Because what you care about for each vendor selection process is going to change each time, okay? The hexad is right for me because I do a lot of security assessments. It works well for me. And 6 is a good number. In general, 6 works. 3 isn't enough, 10 is too many. So 6 works for me. Okay, variables, these are the variables across the top. They're like dimensions, okay? The idea being that the problem you're trying to solve is 6 dimensions in scope. And you just assess each vendor along the 6 dimensions, okay? This is an example of weighting. So availability times 2, utility times 3. Each vendor gets a numeric number, numeric score along each one of the dimensions. You multiply availability by 2, multiply utility by 3, sum them up, you're done. So let's go through the game. From an availability perspective, these pens were highly available. It's hard to leave a security conference without them. Okay, some of them, there were multiples. So they all scored equally on availability. Confidentiality. I ran various tests. I took different pens. I used all the different encryption ciphers I could think of. They all worked. They all worked. They're all about the same as far as confidentiality goes. Now, none of the technologies provided native confidentiality. You had to apply your own algorithm and figure it out from there. So now that's certainly a capability that you could add to an external process. You could hack up some code to an old style plotter, put the pen in there, have a generic encryption class basically that runs the pen through whatever encryption method you want.
So if you had a pen that had encryption built into it, that would get a big plus on this.
That would be a big plus on this scale. As it was, all of these pens scored about the same for confidentiality. Possession and control was a problem. Luckily, all of the pens had the same problem. It's just something that these vendors didn't seem to conceive of in their particular issue, in the vendor space. So, the technology, as you see, is particularly vulnerable to feline interference. But all pens work. Now, certain pens that were heavier seem to have less of a problem that way. But when hit, they went a lot further off the table. So it's a bit of a trade-off there.
And anything with a fuzzy, dangly, sparkly thing would be a more serious problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yes?
Would it be fair to say your selection process had a problem because you didn't include any of the pens that were chained to the table at, say, a bank?
Well, that's part of the availability. Those were not at the security conference. And if they were, I couldn't have taken them. So.
Yeah.
So let's get into some of the variables that matter. Utility is where things get interesting. Like I said, utility is one of my favorite variables.
Some came with paper.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. If users reject the technology, it will not be used. It doesn't matter how secure it is if nobody uses it. So first, determine if the technology works, then determine how much users are likely to use it. These two were total failures. The pens did not rank.
Ooh.
Just, didn't work. So also, during testing, some things happen that are outside of what you expect. Okay? They just don't fit into the paradigm. They didn't fit my anticipated needs. When I was thinking, okay, these are the things I'm going to score these vendors on, some things popped up that simply never crossed my mind. Like this one not actually being a pen.
At all.
It's a set of screwdrivers.
It's a set of screwdrivers. It doesn't write worth a damn.
So if you test it with other screwdrivers, then it would.
Right. But it's a vendor that got into the process that shouldn't have gotten into the process because it doesn't actually work within that vendor space.
And actually, just simply if you'll pardon me for opening my big mouth about screwdrivers, I mean, that looks like a kind of crappy set, if you don't mind me saying so.
But it should be tested against other screwdrivers.
Agreed. It's still a piece of crap, though.
And there could be
Better
worse.
to have a crappy screwdriver than none at all.
Yeah, right on. Or you can just carry a good one, which I can't carry because it's also a pocket knife and the airline doesn't let it on. So this is what scoring along user level looks like. Okay. I measured the activation method. How easily can you turn the pen on? It's harder than you think with some of these things. The feel of activation, was it a nice solid click? Was it weak? There were some you would click and it would just not quite stay. The winners were Aruba Networks, and VMware. So,
Of course, yeah.
so as you can see, I wrote down the weight. I had to buy a kitchen scale to do this project. I wrote down the color of the pen, the color of the ink, the type of the ink, what type of UI it had, whether it was push, twist, or a cap. This one had a cap. User level, comfort, and smoothness was a scale. This particular test, I hadn't gotten to security yet. We'll get to security bits in a minute here. And this one wrote really smoothly, but it's an OEM BIC. Okay. The VMware one, you notice it's a lot heavier, but it felt really well built. You got better build quality. Now, has anybody looked, since this is a Unix Linux group, has anybody looked in Etsy sysconfig on Red Hat and on SUSE? Anybody done direct side-by-side comparison? One of them's German engineered, and you can tell which one immediately. That's what this kind of thing comes in. The feels really well built matters, because if you're working in SUSE and you understand the paradigm, things make a whole lot more sense than in Red Hat, where the paradigm's a little bit looser. Now, they've gotten a little better since they started at Enterprise 5, but it's not quite to where SUSE is. And you can tell the difference immediately. There are various runners-up, which I'm not going to get into here. Okay. So those were the winner pens. All right. Losers. Sophos has a silver pen, made in Germany. It was an interesting kind of a click, and I'll show you that in a minute. It didn't feel right to use. And there was one by Tripwire that was also remarkably difficult to use. Okay, generally speaking, what?
Silver?
Silver.
That's the color, is that the color of the?
That's the color.
Oh,
of
the ink, oh,
pen.
okay, that's the color of the barrel.
Of the pen, yes.
Yeah.
Black pen.
Ink color, it says up there is black.
Ooh. Okay, so these were the ones that lost on utility, and this one lost because of that ankle and the very small connection. It felt wrong. It wasn't an interface I was used to using.
And the clip, the
Yeah.
clicker breaks, the clip goes away.
Right. So if I gave all of my admins that pen and said, now you have to use this pen, they're going to go, I don't want to use this pen. They're going to go to Office Max and buy their own. Or to break the analogy.
You obviously are paying your sysadmins way too much.
Or to break the analogy, they'll bring in freeware into the enterprise, and you will lose control. Okay. The Tripwire pen was remarkably difficult to use. I mean, you can just tell it looks uncomfortable. Okay. In general, technologies that perform more than one function, if they're not integrated well, are difficult to use. Okay. What?
Flyers, flashlight, what is it?
I'll show you. Okay. There were 4 pens that had bonus features. 3 of them were glowy, fancy, flashy pens. One of them, this one, was robotic.
Ooh.
You push the button and it slowly opens and turns into that monstrosity of a pen you see down there in the corner.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Tripwire was completely unique in this space. Nobody else did this, but the cost of the uniqueness was difficult to use.
You couldn't just click the end of it.
No.
It takes longer to deploy.
It takes longer to deploy. It's uncomfortable to write with. Again, give that to admins. They're going to say screw this and go do their own thing. Now, Tripwire knows their stuff is difficult to use, which is why it ships with instructions. Some technology needs instructions. Documentation matters. But documentation for documentation's sake is a problem. Documentation that exists to illustrate a design flaw. Somebody that knows anything about usability looks at this and says, wow, this technology is terrible. And you can tell right away. See, I'm losing my audience. Man, got a 2-year-old, sorry. No. It's okay. Yeah. So, winners for utility. Okay. scored based on comfort. You know, how easy was it to use over the long term? Because tracing this logo took a while. In fact, I watched all of Batman Beyond while I did this project. It took a while, and then once you did it, you know, your hand would cramp, sometimes you dropped the pen, you got a feel for how difficult it was to use or how easy. The winners were Sophos, the white Sophos pen, and the blue Beyond IP pen. And you can see my personal notes. You know, this one was just fun to use. Again, after doing like 5 or 6 logos with some of these really crappy cheap pens, using one of this, it's like, wow, this is just fun. This is great. So there are these ones. And we'll come back to the white pen. There's actually a story behind the white pen. All right, losers, Tripwire. This was my attempt to do the logo. Compare that trace logo to those. Okay? I couldn't get a nice, fine, you know, I could not achieve my business objectives with that tool. And if that's the case, it's got to go. Okay? In general, these technologies that were very heavy or very light were hard to use over time. Same is true for technologies that are highly unusual and hard to work with. So again, we've got a loser for utility. So it's lost twice now. Looking at smoothness, okay? This is ease of use during actual use. You know, if the nib is sharp or draggy, it can perform poorly. If a tool is a joy to use, it will be used more. The winners here were that Aruba pen again and Endace. Okay? The losers, as you can see, they're just not smooth at all. Oh, Aircore had a bonus pen as a highlighter. Bonus feature. Okay? Those were the losers. There were a lot of pens that were hard to use. You know, because when a vendor creates a pen, their concept is, we're just going to make it right. You move it across the paper, ink comes out, we're done, move on. Some of them that put a little bit of extra work into having it meet your needs better are going to win better. Okay? So these are the ones that lost. And
Oh, it's a light
that-
bulb, okay.
Yeah. Now, there is an interesting note here. Some technologies do not seem to have experienced any significant change in either technology or design since the early 1990s.
What are you talking about?
It's just a plain old pen.
It's a plain old Bic. That's clearly what I'm talking about, right? Yes, that got a lot of laughs at Derby Cup. Okay. Now, it's important that whatever technology you select, it can be relied upon to not be easily interfered with. So we get to mess with the technology and the technology's output. Okay? We're getting into one of my favorite bits here. Now, the original plan, when I was a kid, we used to make guns out of pens, where you invert the spring and you put things in and you click it and it just shoots across the room. Couldn't get it to work. I don't know if I lost my touch. Most of these pens I just couldn't shoot the guns, and the ones that didn't work.
Launch testing.
Yeah, so launch testing just, it was something I planned to assess vendors on. None of them. Couldn't do it with any of them, which means I had to adjust the way I was assessing. Just like happens if you're looking at real technology. You may decide, say you're looking at virtualization, and you're going, okay, I want to have my VMs migrate, but I want the security context to migrate with them. That's not built in to any virtualization technology today. That is, if you hit that point, you go, wow, none of these people have it. That's when you go, okay, I need to either just assess virtualization or assess virtualization and security context pairing. Okay, then you're doing an extra dimension to your assessment process. In my case, it's like, I've got enough fun things to do, I'm just gonna not do this one. Another interesting note, some vendors truly care about your security and their pens come equipped with protection. Some protection is not true protection, but is actually we're concerned about comfort and protecting their product and not about protecting you. So let's get to the most fun part here. Okay? For the launch test failed. For the first time in my entire life, mechanics failed and chemistry worked. Hopefully it'll never happen again. I used 6 different solvents, tested it 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and 20 minutes, didn't see any changes past 20 minutes. I took a piece of paper, I wrote the logo or the name of each pen with each pen on the piece of paper and dumped it in the trays. Mineral spirits, as you can see, had practically no effect. Okay? This is a petroleum distillate commonly used to thin paints. Doesn't work on ink. Not what I expected.
Thinnerine.
What?
I keep thinking thinnerine.
Thinner.
Well, paint thinner.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the paint. Most of these are paint thinners.
Okay,
Like TRPS is a turpentine replacement.
okay.
Okay. Much like mineral spirits, didn't do much interesting. Now I had a lot of hope for Gugong, right? It was not nearly as good at dissolving the ink as it was at dissolving the protective plastic sleeve I put the paper in afterwards. But, you know, basically the more complex the technology, the more likely unintended consequences are to occur. See, this is what happened to the protective sleeve. Okay. Now, as we all know, many security practitioners like alcohol. Because it works. Look at that. Stuff's starting to go away. This is called check washing. This is actually a problem in the security industry. It used to be a bigger problem than it is now. These days you can buy special paper that's more proof against check washing, and you can buy special pens that are also protected against check washing, which is actually the inspiration for this entire joke.
Somebody handed out secure pins last year sometime.
That was me.
That was you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I still have mine, and whenever I write a check, I go out and
Yeah.
get it.
When I formed RJS, people said, okay, we need a giveaway. And it's like, all right, the giveaway will be blue pens with 207 ink, because then it's an actual security pen. I don't want to give out crap. So this is what it looked like with alcohol. I mean, you notice we already have some losers starting to pile up. Blue coats
completely?
Some are gone completely. It's just alcohol. So Blue Coat, Bradford Networks, both of the Edgewave pens are gone. ESET's gone, Landesk is gone, Logarithm, Maru, N-Circle, Sourcefire, and Varonis.
Checks with those.
All just- What was that?
Those words don't sign any checks with those.
Right, exactly. Now, speaking of alcohol, this was another liar pen.
Oh, it's an alcohol dispenser.
Yes, it's an alcohol dispenser, hand sanitizer.
Ah,
It's great if you need to smuggle sanitizer onto a plane.
or check washing material.
Right. So acetone, right? No, that's clearly something to test. Same results.
Same thing?
Same as alcohol. The technology that was vulnerable to alcohol was also vulnerable to acetone. It is common when you're doing assessments, you don't need to test every single thing. Because if a vendor is going to fail one, odds are they're going to fail them all. So pick the ones that matter the most and don't do a full test. All it's going to do is give you a slightly higher feel of comfort for a massively higher time investment. Liftoff was one I picked up on a lark. You know, it says markers, pens, and inks, right? Why not try it? Well, damn, it works.
What's that stuff again?
It's called Liftoff.
Liftoff.
Yeah.
I gotta write that down.
Yeah, it's massive fading of almost everybody, and only a handful of people that won. You know, the Astaro pen won, Endace, M86, McAfee, the white Sophos pen, and Trend Micro. With the exception of the Astaro pen, all of these also ranked highly on all levels of utility, which is a pattern you start to see. You see something that massively hits on one variable, it's generally because the vendor put thought into it. And you tend to get similar effects in other variables as well. So, authenticity. Truth about technology. There's very little out there that's new. There's a lot out there that's shared. Okay, there's a lot that's unclear as to where exactly bits of technology came from. You have to find a way, if you care about authenticity, to know where the technology came from, but in a rather limited time. This is more of a problem in security than it is in general practice. Because in security, there are certain countries, certain companies you cannot buy from. It's just how it is. And if those countries have contributed source code or contributed chipsets or something like that into a product another company has, or if somebody's just OEMing something, it's going to matter, which is why you saw the notes of this pen is an OEM version of this. You know, a good example is a company called Lumention. Lumention writes patch management software. Companies that OEM Lumention's patch management software include, but are not limited to, Sophos and Dell Case. So if you're familiar with those technologies, you know at the back end for the patch management piece, this is what they're using. Companies that provide technology in an OEM model tend to have technology partners listed on their site. And that's a fast way to do a rapid assessment like that. If you're doing pens, it's going to matter. Those pens look kind of similar. Yeah, these are all OEM'd from one particular company. I think those are Primeline. Okay, Primeline makes marketing pens. That's how the old brand. You pick the color, you slap your logo on, you're done. Bic did the same thing. Papermate was another one. And these were companies, Uniball, Scripto, and Ritter. Ritter's a German company. That's that one that made that Sophos wacky angled pen. It's important to know where the technology comes from. There's nothing wrong with a vendor OEMing for somebody else. There's nothing wrong with a vendor building all the technology in-house. You have to know what they both mean. Vendor builds all the technology in-house. You know that you're not going to have a vulnerability in the supply chain that's going to knock them out. However, they might not have enough people internally to properly maintain that technology. So that changes the questions you ask in the assessment and negotiation phase. If somebody's OEMing the technology, then what you do is go, okay, who else OEMs this technology? And then what additional features do they wrap around the technology that matter? Because if you do a test of the OEM piece of the technology, you don't have to test it again and again and again on all these other vendors. You've done it. So it saves you time. I mentioned foreign influence as a problem in security. Luckily, they're pretty obvious in the pen space as to what those are. So this gives us enough data to actually to start making decisions. So we combine our winners and losers, right? And what I've basically done here as a way to rapidly filter is all of these pens that are authenticity, those are all pens made in China. So we're just going to pretend that, this business that's trying to source is not allowed to do business with China. It cuts all of those out. So what we've got is in the top green, those are pens that passed our tests. Clear winners. In the bottom red, these are pens that failed. Clear losers. Okay? So, what's interesting is M86 and McAfee and Beyond IP were winners that happened to be made in China. So because we say, in this case, these are things we just can't have. Government says can't do business this way. Those have to come out, which means we have this list of potential winners. This is where the weighting comes in, okay? So we look at adjusting these. So this is actually weighting by weight. The VMware pen was the heaviest. Heavy pens were hard to use over the long term. We need to get people out because we want to get down to a more manageable set of people to do price negotiation with. VMware's kicked out on that basis alone. Is it fair? Maybe, maybe not. But it doesn't matter because any of these solutions are good enough. And if any of the solutions are good enough, an arbitrary rule that kicks somebody out that the entire team agrees to is a reasonable thing to do because you care more about time than about solution. Any of these will solve the problem decently. You're trying to save time now. The remaining pens are in the 10 gram to 14 gram range. Now, looking at utility. I made a note on the McAfee pen that I didn't show. The McAfee pen actually unscrewed itself as I was writing with it. So kick that out. The Astaro pen lacked smoothness, didn't have quite as much coverage as the others. Aruba had mid-range comfort, the others were a little bit more comfortable. Okay, again, these aren't terrible, but we have to eliminate options. So we eliminate those. And then in double checking our integrity check, that's where I put the paper in the different chemicals to figure things out. While this pen passed that check, when you do a deeper comparison on the results, you notice compared to everybody else on this list, there was significant blurring. You could still read it, but when exposed to chemicals, it blurred out a little bit. So again, kick it out, get us down to the magic number of 4. Why 4? Because you can run 4 proofs of concept in about a month. 4 weeks in a month, 1 week for a proof of concept, do 4 tests, you're done. Okay? So, this is 4 pens that won from a set of 67 pens. Detailed technical analysis, relatively rapid to do. Okay? At this point, you would start doing deeper technical tests on the pens to rank them 1, 2, 3, and 4, so you go into price negotiation. This could be things like throwing them at the ceiling to see which one sticks better. Writing out 2-page essays, writing brand new fiction, inking comic books. One that I wanted to try but I couldn't afford on eBay was to get a vacuum chamber and create leaks. See how that works.
Run it through the washing machine.
Yeah, run it through the washing machine. Different things you can do. Now, some of those tests are destructive. So you would want to get extra copies. Backup VMs, something like that. Okay. Then you get into price negotiation. And there's a mathematical formula that I put given the book that I can talk about if people really care about the nitty-gritties of price negotiation. The basic idea is, suppose that they want in this order, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Suppose Sophos costs $2,000 for a pen. Trend $1,500, $250. Any of them are good enough. So that you say, I want the Sophos pen because my team likes it better, but my budget only allows me to buy a trend pen. So you go to Sophos and you say, I want your product, but I want it at this price. If you don't give it to me at this price, I'll buy trend. And Sophos is going to say yes or no. Or they're going to say, well, we can drop it, but not quite that far. And then you decide, okay, is 1,200 reasonable? And work through that. And I have the formula says, based on the features you're looking at and how well it fits your needs, what is that threshold going to be? And then you negotiate, you basically ask for something lower. Once they hit your target point, you're done. Because time wasted past that is time you could be spending implementing technology and solving your problem. A lot of people really try to bend the vendors over during the negotiation process, and the vendors will walk, or you'll destroy the relationship, which means implementation and support are going to be a problem over the long term. So, figure out where your threshold is, get the vendor to meet it, they either will or won't. If they don't, go to the next vendor on the list. If they do, buy them, move on with life. Okay, before we get to Q&A, I just want to show these ones off. Okay, I couldn't figure out why blue LEDs and pens went well together, but they do. Popular. Some of them look really like, ooh, this is art mail. The Sophos one actually blinked.
And it's a good jet, I might say. The light side.
Yeah. So I want to tell you one quick story. It's a little bit off topic about that white pen. Okay, so there were lots of Sophos pens. There was an Astaro pen. Sophos purchased Astaro. Now, what was fascinating is the pens. The early Sophos pens were just terrible. You know, there was one that didn't work. You know, the one made in Germany just wasn't comfortable. They were okay, but they weren't great. The Astaro pen wrote beautifully, but broke as I used it. Since Sophos purchased Astaro, the Sophos pen, which was always comfortable to hold and easy to turn on and off, got the ink cartridge from the Astaro pen.
Ooh.
And it combined them both.
Oh my.
Much in the same way that the technology that Sophos purchased from Astaro has been merged into their product line, and now both products are working very well together.
We have metaphor.
Yes, I really did not expect that when this started, but it was beautiful to see.
Oh, wow.
So, this is the book. That's the QR code that gets you to the Amazon URL for the book. Buy my book. Yes,
When does the book come out?
book's out.
Ah,
Yeah, yeah. The book has been out for about 4 months now. Now, did anybody, to completely change the topic, anybody here see my my how to hack a job search presentation when I came out here last year? You did, a couple of people? That book's coming out next month.
All right.
And it is so much better than the talk you saw.
Yeah, I missed that, and I really wanted to see that.
Buy the book.
yeah.
It's
It
called
was
Job
a
Reconnaissance.
Very good presentation. It really was. Very good. Just as this one. Thank you.
Thanks. I didn't bother people too much with the pen metaphor.
Oh, it was fun, and if you kept thinking about it, it really helps you think about the other, the whole process.
So are people done looking at this slide?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's my contact info.
Stalk me. Anthropologist. Oh.
I study chaos and I remove it from IT and business systems.
Still think that.
I study chaos and I remove it from IT and business systems.
Chaos.
What was the title of the job search book?
It's going to be called Job Reconnaissance, unless the publisher changes it on me in the next month.
Job reconnaissance.
Job Reconnaissance. Yeah, you can go to Amazon and pre-order it.
Is it available as a download, or is it only paper?
It will be available as an ebook.
Okay.
They're both available as ebooks, or will be.
This particular presentation, do you sometimes give that to people, prospective clients, the processes, helpful
well,
for them?
The vendor book is relatively new, and I'm in the process of figuring out how exactly to talk about it with people, because it's something that's needed,
Yeah.
but it's not really something I've really thought much about before I wrote the book. It's just something I did. I thought everybody did it. And until I gave this presentation you just saw at DerbyCon, and the people that stayed in the audience went, wow, I never thought about it that way. You know, I literally thought everybody already knew this stuff. I thought everybody was already assessing vendors this way because it just seemed obvious to me. And I guess I thought differently. So I'm trying to figure out how to talk to other people about this.
From being around forever and being from a military background, looking back on some of the old stuff I saved, the assessing they used to be, you know, essentially they would do what amounted to as a chart or a grid, and just arbitrarily start assigning stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And surprisingly, even back then, you know, at some point in the process, that becomes very useful.
It looks arbitrary to begin with,
Right, you know,
but it works.
but it works. You know, developing a process and in using the process, you gaining insight as to what you're looking for.
Yeah. One of the things I learned in my first job out of college as a developer is write one to throw away. If you're developing software, make a rapid prototype and plan to just ditch it, because you learn so much in that process that you think the next one is so much better. This vendor process is much the same way. If you go through it, that first vendor you pick isn't going to have everything you need, but the second vendor you pick is probably going to be a vendor for life.
It's an amazing title that fits so well, pen testing. A delight. Thank you.